And again, 4 or 5 decades ago, many of these boxes would be empty. In fact, the rows would not be there at all. But now you see a proliferation of networks, countries joining regional arrangement. Now, this is an incredible diplomatic phenomenon in the Asia Pacific. It does not mean that they all agree with one another, but what it does mean is that diplomatic landscape is changing, and perhaps also the strategic mindset. Now, you ask me why this is happening, why all this proliferation of diplomatic partnerships. I would suggest 2 points. First, relationships after the Cold War are being de-ideologized. Countries don't project their ideology so much anymore. They see they're becoming pragmatic. What's in it for me? How much more we can trade and invest in one another. China, the fact of ideology is completely removed from their foreign policy, which is why now we have a normal relations and more than that, a strategic partnership. Second reason, since the end of the Cold War and after 9/11, there is a major realignment of interests taking place. Countries that used to have divergent interests suddenly have new interests that pull them together. They see a lot of the interests overlap and they are willing to work together. One reason is terrorism. Terrorism compels countries across the region to work with one another. Terrorism makes everyone allies, really, right? And it makes them allies in an easy way. The fight against diseases, the fight against natural disasters, the fight against people smuggling, and so on and so on. These are major realignments of interests that are redefining how countries relate and connect with one another. Now, I do believe, I don't know if this is going to be a popular thing to say in America, but I do believe in the 21st century partnerships will be more important than alliance systems. Now, the alliances will be around, of course. In Asia Pacific, you will still have ANZUS and 5-power defense agreements. NATO is expanding. A few more countries are joining. The Americans' bilateral treaty alliances are still there. But much of the movement and diplomatic space in the 21st century will take the form of partnerships, not alliances. Even the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, spearheaded by China and Russia, is more a partnership than an alliance. Why is a partnership easier? Because it's easier to strike, it's flexible, it's more functional and dynamic, it's easier to get results, it's quicker to enter into, it's easier to leave if you don't like it, and it's much less political. There's not going to be much debate. I mean, this is what happened with the Indonesia-US relationship. We are constitutionally prohibited to enter into alliance with any country, including the United States. But entering into comprehensive partnership with the United States was relatively easy. There was no debate in the parliament about that. Right? So I suspect more countries will engage in more diplomatic partnerships, economic partnerships. And the key to America is not just strengthening the alliance from your perspective, but have to be part of these growing, rich, dynamic partnerships around Asia, Pacific, and around the world. I do also think that partnerships is more needed in multilateral reforms. We're beginning to see this. UN Security Council has not been reformed, but the UN has seen some major reforms. But what we need to see also is a better sense of partnership among the developing countries, on the part of developing countries. Much of the developing countries, multilateral groupings, G77, tend to see things too much from the era of the 70s. We see this as sometimes on climate change issue and other issues, and this is why sometimes Indonesia takes the step of not breaking, but taking a line that is different from others. On climate change, we've done that, for example. But we see that as we reform multilateral diplomacy, even developing countries too have to start moving away from the hardline 70s ideological approach that used to be the approach of the past. They have to be also more open-minded and more constructive. But the big question is whether or not these network partnerships will slowly change geopolitics and in the Asia Pacific towards geopolitics of cooperation. You know, geopolitics have always been defined in terms of contest, conquest, and conflict and competition, which is true and which is probably going to be around for some time now. But the realignment of interest is producing ways to change that little bit into a geopolitics of cooperation. One example is that in the North Korean nuclear issue, for the first time you see America, Russia, China, Japan, Korea working together to address this. This is something that you would not see during the Cold War. When we had the tsunami, you know, all the big countries, they all compete. You know, the American Navy, the Russians, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Australians, the Singaporeans, they all compete to work together to help us, right? So the space of geopolitics of cooperation is expanding. It's not going to overcome the geopolitics of conflict or competition probably, but I'm glad to see that this space is expanding, and this is what we need to encourage more. Third, the spread of governance will change the international landscape. You know, if you ask me what is the most significant political development in the 20th century, I would say it's the rapid spread of democracy. This is the number of democracies today, according to Freedom House, is 123. There are three major waves. First wave, 19th century, 29, and then 36, and then 60, adding all to 123. Larry Diamond and many analysts say democracies are in distress now. It's probably not going to expand that much anymore. I don't know if what happened in Egypt and Tunisia is going to be the start of the fourth wave of democracy. That remains to be seen. But what I would argue, even though democracy is in distress, or even though hopefully they will continue to expand, in the 21st century, what will change the world is the spread of governance, right? This is what we have learned from the experience of Indonesia. Democracy by itself does not solve all your problems. It does not solve political instability. It does not solve human rights problems. It does not solve ethnic conflicts. It does not automatically solve social tensions or economic crisis or extremism and terrorism or poverty. Only when democracy connects with governance that you can resolve all these problems. And this is necessary because there are only three ways a democracy can go. You know, you look at everywhere around the world, there are only three ways. One, it becomes stronger, more resilient. Two, it just stagnates, it doesn't go anywhere. Or three, it experiences decay and eventually crumbles. Right? The best way for that democracy to go up and up is to connect with governance, because there's plenty of democracies which is not equipped with governance, which ends up failing. Right? So the challenge of democracies is to connect to governance. You know, people say that there have been three waves of democracy, as we say, but I do believe there have always been waves or maybe ripples of governance also. Quite a few of them. You know, China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Turkey, and a few other countries, Vietnam, right? And all these ripples or waves have created emerging economies and creating target economies and crowding the club of the community of international economic landscape. The more governance spreads, the more the world will have emerging economies and empowered people, and the more it will change economic and political landscape. These are some of the countries that are doing well on certain categories of governance: voice and accountability, political stability, regulatory quality, rule of law, control of corruption, and so on, and so on. So what? Well, so what is governance? Means different things to different people, but if you want to improve governance, I would suggest at least two things that you can work on. One, concentrate on building the system. Right? Why? Because governance in the 21st century is no longer about great men. You know, these towering figures of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Sukarno, Nkrumah, Nasser. It's about great system, great institutions. Right? So this is what you are seeing also in Libya. The challenge is not the great men are things of the past. It's a great system. If you don't have great system, the country is going to crumble. So the challenge for governance means building systems and institutions. Secondly, promoting governance in the 21st century means you have to do away with dogmatism. My generation, I grew up being ideological. That's my upbringing intellectually and also in bureaucracy, because you're trained to think in a certain way, right? You don't go outside the corridor. Right? Again, in many other countries, this is the same. But if you want to succeed in governance, I think the 21st century is the century whereby ideology will be less relevant. Right? You will have to be more pragmatic, more open-minded about how you pursue your options in government. And I would say that dogmatism is going to be something that you need to do away if you want to promote good governance. Fourth, the individual will be the most powerful agent of change in the 21st century. The most serious or relevant phenomenon in the 19th and 20th century was the revolution, the revolution of the people, of the mass. This is what history books are full of. But in the 21st century, the greatest revolution will be in the realm of the individual. Right? Now, in the 19th century, if you see the profile of individual, that's the guy on the left. He's totally powerless. He has no vote, he has no education, he has no means, he has no impact, he has no future. He's completely exploited. And he is part of a long lineage of generations of deprivation, which means his parents, his grandparents, his great-great-grandparents, it goes back 20 generations behind, are the same like him. There's no social mobility. Their lives are all the same. Life expectancy, where they live, who they marry, they're all the same thing. The universe is the same to them, flat across 20 or 30 generations. Then in the 20th century, you see something else. This is a 20th century Indonesian, but you can replace this with Ghanaian, Nigerian, Turkish, Indian, or Pakistani, or any other thing. Right? We begin to see what I would call the empowered individual. Right? He has a degree, he has the means to take care of himself, his family, and maybe his society. He's productive, and he has a future. And I call that man in the middle the line breaker. Right? The line breaker means after 20 or 30 generations of flat line, this guy, by the virtue of his education, breaks that line, right? And that break that flat line of static life lived before by his forefathers. Now, the 21st century is full of these empowered individuals. By the way, that man in the middle is my dad. He's the first man to get out of his village in 1950s. And he got scholarship into UVA. And this is a testament to how God is so just, because he put brilliance in every man's, no matter where they are. He got his PhD, having spoken no English before, in 1 year from the best school in the United States in UVA. Right? So this empowered individual was beginning to rise in the 20th century, and you are seeing millions and millions more like him, not just in Indonesia, but throughout the developing world. And this is why I would say the 21st century is the age of the individual. Yes, there's probably about 1.4 billion people living on less than $1 a day. And there's still hundreds of millions of people being marginalized around the world. But at the same time, the size of the middle class worldwide is rising phenomenally. Right? Now, this number has no way to go but up. The economists say that half of the world population, for the first time, half is counted as middle class, loosely defined. They may not earn $60,000 a year, but according to purchasing power parity, what they make and what they can buy, they can be counted as the middle class. And when the middle class rises everywhere, that means they keep producing empowered individuals who can think on his own. We tend to think about celebrity individuals, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerman, George Soros, and so on and so on. But they are really a tiny minority. You're looking at the wrong place. There are only about 1,100 billionaires. They have $4.5 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, their collective wealth. But they're just a very small part of the larger stories of empowered individuals. Billions worldwide. They're not rich, but they are resourceful. They have the capacity, the tools, the opportunity to create and change, and they do remarkable things. Let's see some of them. The top guy, Muhammad Yunus, single-handedly, using the education and idealism that he had, is providing empowerment to millions of poor people, mostly women. There's Jody Williams, who won the Nobel Peace Prize because she, by way of email, organized international movement that produced the international ban on landmine treaty. This is my favorite, Talia Lehman. I just saw her in Denver, where I gave a speech there recently. Talia is only 15-year-old, and she was raising money for Katrina. She was aiming for something like $100,000, which she thought that was a dream, impossible. But she found something creative. She found a niche, and she ended up donating $10 million to this kid, to Katrina victims. And now she has an organization of kids around 20 countries around the world. Now that's my best. I'm in love with that kid, Joshua Williams. Don't tell my son I said that, right? Like Joshua Williams, when he was 5, he said, well, I want to see and help poor people. He got $20 and he was supposed to buy some birthday gift for his birthday, and he said, no, I'd rather give it to the poor. He gave it to one poor guy and he felt so good about it, and he got it fixed. So he started saying, well, anything I get now, I'm going to give to the poor. He launched a movement. He was only 5, going on 6, going on 7 and 8, right? And you know what he does? That kid, with his foundation, 8 years old, now feeds 7,500 poor people. 8 years old, right? Empowered individual. There's a story that my wife told me about a kid, junior high in Indonesia. They're able, with their education, to introduce a software, and the software has been now bought and purchased by how many people? Is it
235,000.
Yeah, right. It's not the money that counts, but how education and opportunity and empowerment all collect together to produce empowered individuals who can change the world. I do believe that the collective, the total collision of empowered individuals around the world will create a creative explosion. The middle class alone in the BRIC countries, in Brazil, Russia, India, and China, will grow to 1.6 billion people. There are now around 800 million people now. Imagine what creative explosion will be created by that. And herein lies the secret of the 21st century. The force of individuals as change agents. And countries that pursue their political, economic, and social developments that do not take into account will lose out. They will lose out. Finland understands it. Finland has come up with a law that says that access, this baffled me, access to broadband, fast internet connection is a human right. Right? They made this into a law, right? But they get this. They get this. And the impacts will also be felt in Asia. In Asia, we've been so fixed on the concept of the community, right? Community is more important than the individual. This is a long-standing, 100 and 1,000 years old philosophical argument, including in Indonesia, right? But we cannot escape the reality of the age of the individual. We're going to have to give more room to individual, because the individual means there's an individual voice that asks for diversity and variety and non-conformity. And the political, economic, and social system must account for that one way or another. And what this also means is that for individual skills, your skill is your best currency. And this is what I tell my children, and this is my philosophy in growing my children. The best currency is not the US dollar, it's not the Chinese yuan or the Russian ruble. Right? It's your skill. How many languages you speak, what computer degrees you have. These are the things you carry for life and defines who you are and how much of an empowered individual you can be. And what this means for nations, for governments, is that the best things that can unlock this is meritocracy. My friends in Latin America must take note of this, because meritocracy is not strongly implanted there as well, just not as much as it does in Asia. Entrepreneurship, right? Indonesia is still very lacking. We're still only about less than 1 or 2% of our population can count as entrepreneurs. right? Education, volunteerism, these are the things that will unlock individuals' potentials. And countries that want to unleash this potential, they need to do policies that will promote meritocracy, entrepreneurship, education, and also volunteerism. And just a note, this is also what I think when I look at the American budget. It's none of my business, it's your business. But I look at the defense budget. It's about $6 or $700 billion, right? It's quite a lot of money. I think it's being trimmed down a little bit. But did you know that $1 billion creates or produces 10,000 MBAs? Did you know that? I didn't know that. $1 billion produces 10,000 MBAs. What can you do with MBAs? What can you do with 10,000 MBAs? You can create a nation. You can change a nation, right? And you don't just change it. You lift a nation in such a way that it changes the fate of that nation forever. Just alone. Now, 5, connectivity will bring more impact than sovereignty. Now, I'm a realist. I know. I read the academic books. I don't have any doubt that nation states will remain a key actor in international politics. I don't think in my lifetime I will see a transnational government. But there is a powerful trend called connectivity that is having a greater impact, potentially, than governments. A few decades ago when I started working with the government, for the government, contacts between governments and also between business people were mainly the only game in town. I was director of North American Affairs some years back, and my contacts with the U.S. government would be limited to few diplomats, only several of them, and a few government officials, and even then it's just a few phone calls a week. And that would define the structure of relations between our governments. But today is an entirely different universe. Facebook has 500 million people, which means what? They're the 4th largest nation, if there were a nation in the world. 1.8 billion people have emails around the world, and I read somewhere that 19 trillion emails alone were circulated in 1 year. Twitter, of which I remember, have 190 million users. And what this means is that the connection between societies and individuals now way exceed the connection between governments. Way exceed the connection between governments. And this is a trend that will only grow. It is changing politics, it is changing diplomacy, and it is changing society. We're seeing, for example, the growth of digital democracy. What that means is different countries may have different political systems, different cultural and historical backgrounds, but they all access the same World Wide Web. Yeah? They all see the same things being posted on the internet, and they can connect with one another freely without boundaries. I know there's some issues with some countries, but I see this as only temporary. They cannot stop history. Right? This is a trend that is going to go on for a very long time. Right? Now, connectivity will lead to explosion of opportunity as well, because connectivity and opportunity are tightly linked. Whether you are individual, business, or government, your opportunity multiplies with connectivity. And the reason why connectivity is important is I found out the most important word that we live in now. You know what is that word? I think it's multi, right? The M word, multi-world. What is it? It's multi-system, multi-ethnic, multinational, multipolar system, multilingual, multilateral, multimedia, multitasking, multi-everything. And in such a multi-world, our ability to connect is critical to our ability to survive and progress. And this also means that in such a multi-world where everybody has a way to connect across borders one with another, north to south, east to west, east to north, and west to south, we are seeing a world of confluence. What that means is that when ideas meet, they don't necessarily clash. They weave together. They become a confluence, right? And this is what you will see with fusions. you will see more fusions between cultures, between peoples, between nations, technologies, ideas, and innovations. In Indonesia, we are very proud of our something called batik. This is has been acknowledged by UNESCO as a heritage of mankind. And what we're trying to do at the embassy now is to promote American batik. That is to promote what would Americans produce if they were to come out with their own batik. Right? We're going to launch a nationwide competition on this. But that is an example of fusion between Western and Eastern culture, and we're not defensive about it. We think the more fusion, the more connectivity, the more confluence we produce, the better the world will be. Number 6, technology will be the key driver of the 21st century. Now, human history is the blink of an eye in the history of the world, and also technology is even a very small part of it. Now, they say that, do we have this? Yeah. Humans become hunter-gatherers about 0.2 million years ago, and it took a long time before they discovered language. It took about 40,000 years before they discovered agriculture. It took about, 6,500 years before they started writing, and many more years before they started finding out about machines, and so on and so on. So technology has progressed very, very slowly. But what is incredible is that in the 21st century, technological change will be undergoing dizzying speed. It's said that in the first 20 years of the 20th century, they saw as much progress as the entire 19th century. And technological progress is said to double every 10 years, which means they say the 21st century will experience 1,000 times technological change than the 20th century. And that the 20th century will produce technological progress equal to 20,000 years of normal human progress. And we try to figure that out. But technology will no longer be Western. I was surprised to learn that in 2007 alone, there were 160,000 Chinese engineers registering their patents worldwide. And I would argue that if the 20th century is the century of big ideas, nationalism, democracy, and so on, what will change the world in the 21st century is small gadgets, cell phones, GPS, microcredit, low-cost airlines, $100 laptops, and so on and so on. So what? Well, my advice to developing countries, fellow developing countries, is that in this dizzying acceleration of technological progress, know what you want. President Lyndon Johnson was right when he said that progress must be the servant of our needs. What we need to see is that, what we need to acknowledge is that the poor rural areas in much of the developing world do not need to adopt all the new fancy technologies that we have here. They need to decide what kind of technology they need, how much of it, when do they need it, and how to get it. And they need to develop poor technologies, not just in information technology, but also in microcredit, biotechnology, hybrid seeds, and so on and so on. And this is a challenge because in many countries, many development strategies have not integrated poor technologies into their system. Now, in a world where technology is king, one thing that everybody needs to know, developed and developing countries alike, is that scientific literacy becomes more important. And this is where you can't miss the boat. You may be taking the lead 10 or 20 years ago, but today you will be number 10 or number 20 if you are complacent. So we are seeing, my friends tell me in America that scientific literacy is declining in America, whereas in Asia it's rising. We count this by the number of people taking actually science and engineering degrees and math degrees. The number is declining. A lot more students are taking liberal arts degrees, which is nice, of course, right? But if we define the future in terms of scientific literacy, then I think something needs to be done. I think President Obama got it right when he delivered his State of the Union address recently, which reflects these concerns. One last point about technology. It's important to note that technology makes us all vulnerable but also it can dehumanize us. I mean, that is a contradiction. Technology is an expression of humanity, but the more you use it, the more you can lose your soul, the more it can dehumanize us. One of the best movies I've seen, best line in the movie is that movie Contact, when the character played by Jodie Foster said, "How do you overcome this technological adolescence without destroying yourself?" Technology is very much at its infancy. It has a long way to go, and it will not change our planet, but it will change humanity. And we need to think very deeply about this. The invention of the watch, that changed human behavior. And because people you see in town, they're hungry, right? Just like me and my wife. But since the invention of the clock, we eat regularly, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right? That's just one invention. It changes our humanity. Right? Imagine what these cell phones, what these iPads, and all these other gadgets, how they will change us. With the BlackBerry message, people say that we are closer to people who are far than the people who are near to us because we keep testing them, right? That's already a change of social behaviors. But that is something that I need to flag with you. Finally, the last point. We are witnessing the we are witnessing the phenomenal emergence of global conscience. Again, this is something new. 20th century was a cruel century. I think previous centuries also. You had 2 world wars. More people died in the 20th century than any other period in human history. You had apartheid, you had Holocaust, you had hatred, you had wars, you had proxy wars. People were dying all over the place, human rights violations all over the place, and so on, and so on. But towards the end of the 20th century, and now we're seeing the emergence of this global conscience. Suddenly these empowered individuals and also governments, they begin to think differently. They begin to think and care about people beyond their borders and speak out, and they have a compassion that extends worldwide. This is not just happening in the West, but also in the non-Western world. When the Chilean monarchs got stuck in their hole, not just Americans, not just Latin Americans, even Indonesians, they kept checking their internet to see, what is the latest on that. And in Indonesia, when we had the tsunami, Muslims countries, Western countries, everybody got in the act of helping us. And the American volunteers who help us, they said this is the best thing they've ever done in their whole military career. But this global conscience is a new force in international relations. We're also seeing, as part of this global conscience, the rise of multiculturalism. I'm so happy to see this. I lived here in 1979, this, and America did not feel multicultural, right? The TV shows, the relations between the races and so on, it just did not feel, although we were seeing changes at that time. But now I returned to America in the year 2011. You are such a multicultural country, not just by the way Barack Obama is president, but you look at the State Department and you see all races. The head of the office that does Indonesia is a Korean American. Joe Yoon, a good friend of mine, and so on and so on. Multiculturalism, freedom of religion is just part of national ethos in America, a real part, but also worldwide. And there are exceptions, of course, but the new politically correct globally is multiculturalism. And we're also saying, on top of that, a new kind of relations between the faith, particularly the Abrahamic religions. Now, this is an area where we've had serious relations, serious problems, because in the last 2,000 years or so, or beyond that, these 3 religions, even though they come from the same roots, they have the same heritage, they've been at odds with one another. There have not been one century whereby there's total peace between Islam, Muslims, Jews, and Christians, right? Now, this is starting to change. I was so impressed recently in America. I came to see Islam, the Islamic Society of North America, and they're starting to think differently. They're starting to think, why should the past guide us towards the future? Right? Why can't we make our own path towards the future? So what they do, they start reaching out to Jewish organizations, and they start saying, let's reach out, let's connect, and also to Christian organizations. And what happens was they asked the leader of a Jewish organization, to speak at Islamic North America Society conference. It is a big one. I'm talking about 250,000 people come out. It was difficult at first, and then when they tried it, they liked it. And what happens was, afterwards, the Islamic leader was invited to the Jewish convention, and they liked it, right? He was expecting to be, Dr. Said said, well, this is going to be struggle, but no. And they did the same thing with the Christian community, and so on and so on. But what you need is path breakers, people who see things differently, people who are pioneering new change in interfaith relations. And this is what we need to encourage as well. So there you have it, a world in the midst of big shifts in many forms and shapes. Somebody smart will come up with a good name for it, but when the contours of this emerging world order become more clear, we will come up with a better name for it. And I think America also, not just Indonesia, not just Canada, Mexico, or China, America must reinvent and reposition itself in this amazing century. It is going to be the century where you have plenty, opportunity, and capacity, but it will also be a century where you have problems of vulnerability, inequity, and poverty. So these two forces will compete side by side, and America will need to reinvent and find its place in that new world. One thing America must do, I think, is rediscover your confidence, right? What do I say this? I just came from China, Shanghai, where I saw the expo. I just came from India also. And across Asia, you see Asians discovering their confidence. In Indonesia, they had a poll, 85% of Indonesians believe the country is on the right track. 85%. That's a big number. There's a 2009 PEW, I don't know how you read it, Pew or PEW, Global Attitudes Project. They did a poll. They found 94% of Indians, 87% of Brazilians, and 85% of Chinese, very high figures, say that they are satisfied with their lives. Now, compare this to a recent poll taken by Washington Post, which they unveiled in Davos recently. 42% 20 years ago believed that America was competitive. 20 years ago, 42%. Now it's down to 36%. And the number of people that used to think that America can't compete in the world was 22% 20 years ago. Now 27% has a rise in the number of people who believe America can't compete in the world. So again, I don't know what comes first. It's the chicken and egg situation. Is it economic performance and then you get confidence, or confidence or economic performance? But whatever it is, America must rediscover your confidence to regain your greatness. And the second thing that you must do, get out of your comfort zone. Get out of it, right? And I think the debates that I'm seeing now, everywhere I go, if people talk about China and India, reflects that, you realize that, right? But you must get out of your comfort zone because, as I say, times change very fast. Where you were 10 years ago is not going to be where you are today, and it's not going to be where you are now in the next 10 or 20 years, right? This is happening to Indonesia. Where we are now is not where we were 10 years ago, right? Times are moving very, very fast. And your leadership must define where you want to be in the next 20 years and make the right policy choices and investment to achieve that goal. But you must be clear about where you are and where you want to be. And the bottom line is all of us, Indonesians, Americans, Mexicans, Russians alike, what we must avoid is the paradox of our time. What is that paradox? The paradox is the more knowledge we get, the more we lose our wisdom. The more we connect we become, the more distant we become. The more technology we have, the more we lose our soul. The more free we become, the more we act like tyrants. The more we see ahead, the more we become short-sighted. The more we are surrounded by opportunities, the more we are driven by fear. The more we have options, the more we make the wrong turns.
We have time just for a couple questions, but I would like to take a couple of hours.
Thank you, Ambassador David Caprera, for a very enlightening talk. Concerning the role of cultural or citizen diplomacy between Indonesia and America, I want to first commend, along with your presentation, NU, the world's largest, really truly moderate Islamic brand in the world that the former leader of Indonesia, Wahid, was affiliated with. We were recently in Jakarta where they hosted a Global Peace Festival. Your vice president spoke. People like Dr. Saeed Marsudi and former Congressman Slamet pledged that not one terrorist would come out of an NU-trained Muslim leader. And I think your basic principles of your democracy give credit to that. The leaders of NU came to Kenya recently, where President Kibaki hosted a convening dealing with Sudan and some of the hotspot issues. And we can see their generosity in sharing some of their moderate or peaceful approach in terms of this perceived clash of cultures. And you also mentioned your 7th point, the role of compassion beyond borders. I think Terror Free Tomorrow noted that American naval and other NGO forms of assistance after the tsunami really helped plummet the views toward Al-Qaeda and violent responses to, more positive view of U.S. relations. So could you just comment on that 7th point, how the U.S. and Indonesia might further encourage citizen forms of diplomacy and support in those areas?
Well, thanks. The one interesting part about our relation today compared to before is that we've had plenty of conversations with American officials on this, but one area is promoting the sector of multiculturalism and religious tolerance. When President Barack Obama came, this is something that he reflected in the speech, but there's a feeling that America being the world's oldest democracy, a melting pot, and Indonesia being the world's largest democracy and also democracy with the largest Muslim population. When we get together, when we speak together, there is a special voice that comes out of it, because in our countries we embrace and cherish multiculturalism and religious tolerance. So that is definitely one new area in our bilateral cooperation. But there's also a realization that the conflict now is not between Christians against Jews or between Islam against Christians or Christians against Jews. The conflict is really between the radicals and moderates across the board, all over the world. And what that means is that the moderates across religion must connect better. There must be more dialogue, more interfaith cooperation, so on and so on. So it's part of the new agenda of our bilateral diplomacy and also our international agenda. There's lots to be done. There's lots of creative ways that can be done. My embassy, for example, we're going to start what is called Skype Friends Indonesia USA. What that means is, we're not like America. We're broke. We don't have much money. So Skype is free, right? So it's amazing what technology can do to diplomacy. So what we're doing is we're trying to connect Indonesian schools in Indonesia at elementary and junior high level, including Muslim schools, and connect them to local American schools, and they have a 1-hour conversation. They can talk about their country, their school, and what they think about America, and vice versa. Right? So any of you have children that who are going to school that are interested in this project, please contact my embassy, and we'd love to facilitate the Skype Friendship Indonesia-USA connection.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay. My name is Beverly Hong Fincher. I also just came back from China for several weeks, and I had the good fortune to meet an Indonesian engineer who commutes between Shanghai and Beijing, and he asked me a question. He said, "May we borrow your president for 1 term?" So that actually follows up your connectivity between governments. So maybe one day we can have a connected kind of government across the globe. Yeah. My serious question is, you rank human, I'm a linguist, you rank human language under hunter and gatherer, and I think human language should be above Otherwise you cannot communicate. And according to Noam Chomsky, everybody knows Noam Chomsky, and we're still working on when we invent. Our brain. Language has to do with the brain, and otherwise they cannot be hunter-gatherers. Thank you.
I'm going to fire my researchers sitting right there.
Give me an hour.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
I don't know if you can borrow my president, but you can borrow me anytime.
Thank you.
Well, I think the reference to Noam Chomsky is a good place to end. But thank you so much for that presentation. Excellent. It actually opens up a lot of conversation. We could talk about this all day. I particularly like to, at some point, share with you the ideas that we have here at Heritage for getting at a lot of these things. We come at it from a very different perspective, but I think we're all looking at the same situation and trying to understand how to cope with it and probably learn a lot more. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.